When 12-year-old Elijah Washington boarded Flight 447 with only $3 and a peanut butter sandwich, the first-class passengers didn't give him a second glance. Just another poor kid in patched jeans who didn't belong in their world. But 30 minutes into the flight, billionaire Richard Holloway's baby began screaming with a fury that turned the entire cabin into chaos, and no amount of money, expensive toys, or frantic Googling could make it stop. That's when this quiet boy from Chicago's roughest housing project stood up and said 5 words that stunned everyone: "I can calm your baby." What happened next would shatter every assumption about wealth, wisdom, and where life's most valuable lessons really come from. Because sometimes the smallest voices carry the greatest truth. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. The Atlanta airport hummed with its usual chaos as 12-year-old Elijah Washington made his way through the security line. His worn sneakers squeaked against the polished floor, and the straps of his faded backpack dug into his thin shoulders. He clutched his boarding pass like it was made of gold, checking it every few minutes to make sure the gate number hadn't somehow changed. Next, the TSA agent barely looked up as Elijah approached, placing his backpack on the conveyor belt. The X-ray machine revealed its meager contents: a change of clothes, a half-empty water bottle, and a brown paper bag with a peanut butter sandwich he'd made that morning. "Traveling alone?" the agent asked, finally noticing his age. "Yes, sir," Elijah replied, his voice steady despite the nervous flutter in his stomach. "Going to see my mama in Chicago." The agent nodded and waved him through. Elijah collected his backpack and headed toward Gate B24, weaving between business travelers pulling expensive luggage and families corralling excited children. He found a quiet corner near the gate and sat down, trying to make himself small, invisible. 20 minutes before boarding, the atmosphere at the gate shifted. Passengers began whispering and pointing as a man in a charcoal gray suit worth more than most people's cars strode through the terminal. Richard Holloway moved with the confidence of someone who owned half the buildings in downtown Atlanta. His Italian leather shoes clicked against the floor in a precise rhythm, and his personal assistant scurried behind him, juggling 2 phones and a tablet. But it wasn't just Richard who drew attention. In his arms, he carried a baby no more than 6 months old, dressed in designer clothes that looked absurdly formal for an infant. The baby's face was red and scrunched, clearly on the verge of tears. "Mr. Holloway, are you certain you don't want me to accompany you?" the assistant asked, nearly jogging to keep up. "I told you, Sandra, I can handle my own son for 1 flight," Richard said curtly. "The Denver team needs you here for the Morrison acquisition. It's just 4 hours." Sandra looked doubtful, but handed him an expensive diaper bag. "His formula is in the front pocket, extra diapers in the main compartment, and his pediatrician's number is saved in your phone under." "I have it." Richard cut her off, though Elijah noticed how awkwardly he shifted the baby to take the bag. The infant whimpered, and Richard's jaw tightened. As boarding began, Elijah watched the first-class passengers file onto the plane. A woman in pearls wrinkled her nose when she passed him, pulling her Louis Vuitton bag closer, as if poverty might be contagious. A businessman glanced at Elijah's patched jeans and whispered something to his companion that made them both chuckle. Elijah was used to these looks. Back in his neighborhood, everyone knew everyone, and clothes were just clothes. But here, in this world of pressed suits and perfect hair, he stood out like a dandelion in a rose garden. When his boarding group was called, Elijah made his way down the jet bridge. The flight attendants smiled at him, but he caught the flash of concern in their eyes, another unaccompanied minor to keep track of. His seat was 22C, an aisle seat in economy. As he stowed his backpack in the overhead bin, he noticed Richard Holloway settling in a 3A up in first class. The billionaire was fumbling with the baby's car seat attachment, his movements sharp and frustrated. The baby had started to fuss, little whimpers that promised to become something much louder. "Can I help you with that, Mr. Holloway?" A flight attendant named Anna approached, her badge gleaming under the cabin lights. "I've got it," Richard said, though he clearly didn't. After another minute of struggle, Anna gently intervened, clicking the car seat into place with practiced ease. The plane filled quickly. A few rows ahead of Elijah, an elderly woman with silver hair, pulled into an elegant bun, took her seat. Behind him, a nervous-looking man clutched his armrest before they'd even left the gate, clearly a first-time flyer. The cabin buzzed with conversation, the clicking of overhead bins, and the rustle of passengers settling in. Then it started. The baby's fussing escalated to crying just as the cabin doors closed. It wasn't the normal crying of a tired infant. This was the full-throated wail of a baby in genuine distress. The sound cut through the cabin like a siren. Richard fumbled with the diaper bag, pulling out an expensive-looking rattle. He shook it near the baby's face, but the child only cried harder. Next came a stuffed bear that probably cost more than Elijah's entire wardrobe. The baby swatted it away with a tiny fist. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're currently third in line for takeoff." The announcement was barely audible over the baby's screams. Passengers began shifting uncomfortably in their seats. A woman in business class turned around with an annoyed expression. Two teenagers, a few rows up from Elijah, started recording on their phones. "For God's sake," muttered the businessman across the aisle from Elijah. "You'd think a billionaire could afford a nanny." Anna returned to first class, offering to walk the baby, but Richard waved her off. His face had turned red, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. He bounced the baby awkwardly, patting his back with too much force, then not enough. Nothing worked. As the plane lifted off, the crying intensified. The change in pressure seemed to make everything worse. The baby's face had turned purple with the effort of screaming, and Richard looked like he might start crying himself. "This is ridiculous." A man in a polo shirt stood up from first class. "Can't you do something about that, kid?" "Sir, please remain seated while the seatbelt sign is on," Anna said calmly, though Elijah could see the stress in her eyes. "I paid $8,000 for this ticket," the man continued. "I didn't pay to listen to a baby scream for 4 hours." More passengers joined in with complaints. The elderly woman shook her head disapprovingly. Someone suggested the baby should be in cargo. The tension in the cabin grew thicker than the recycled air. From his seat in 22C, Elijah watched it all unfold. He recognized the baby's cry. It had a particular pitch to it, the same sound his neighbor Mrs. Johnson's grandson made when he had gas bubbles. He'd spent countless evenings helping her when she was too tired to handle another sleepless night. Richard was now trying a bottle, but the baby turned his head away, formula dribbling down his expensive outfit. The billionaire's hands shook as he attempted to clean the mess while still holding the screaming infant. "Maybe try holding him upright," Anna suggested gently. "I'm holding him upright," Richard snapped, though the baby was clearly lying too flat in his arms. 15 minutes into the flight, and the screaming hadn't stopped for more than a few seconds at a time. Elijah could see Richard's desperation growing. The man who probably commanded boardrooms and controlled millions of dollars was completely defeated by a 6-month-old baby. Elijah thought of his grandmother, how she used to say, "Baby tears are just words they don't know yet. You gotta listen with your heart, not your ears." He thought of all the nights he'd walked crying babies around the apartment complex while their mothers grabbed a few precious minutes of sleep. He thought of the lullaby his grandmother had taught him, the one that seemed to work like magic. The businessman across from him was now loudly complaining on his phone to someone, probably posting on social media about the nightmare flight. The teenagers were definitely recording Richard's struggle, and Richard himself looked like he was about to either throw something or break down completely. Elijah unbuckled his seatbelt. He made his way up the aisle slowly, aware of every eye that turned to follow him. His sneakers made soft sounds against the carpet, barely audible under the baby's wails. When he reached first class, he stopped at Richard's row. "Excuse me, sir," Elijah said quietly. Richard looked up, his eyes wild with frustration. He took in Elijah's appearance, the patched jeans, the faded t-shirt, the too small jacket, and his expression hardened. "What do you want?" he barked. "I know how to stop him from crying," Elijah said simply. "Just trust me for a minute." The entire first-class cabin went silent except for the baby's cries. Richard stared at Elijah like he'd suggested performing surgery with a butter knife. Anna watched from her jump seat, ready to intervene if necessary. The man in the polo shirt let out a dismissive laugh. "Trust you." Richard's voice dripped with disbelief. "Who are you?" "Just someone who knows babies," Elijah replied, maintaining eye contact despite the weight of all those stares. "I can help." "Really?" The baby let out another ear-piercing scream, and something in Richard's face cracked. His pride battled with his desperation, and for a moment, Elijah thought he would refuse. Then another passenger shouted from the back, "Just let him try. Anything's better than this." Richard's grip on the baby tightened for a moment, then slowly, reluctantly, he held the infant out toward Elijah. The moment Elijah reached for the baby, the first-class cabin erupted in whispers and barely concealed laughter. The man in the polo shirt was the loudest. "This is Rich," he said, not bothering to lower his voice. "The billionaire needs a street kid to handle his own baby. Someone's definitely posting this online." A woman with perfectly styled blonde hair leaned toward her husband. "What could a child like that possibly know that Richard Holloway doesn't? Look at his clothes. He probably doesn't even have running water." Elijah heard every word, but his hands remained steady as he waited. Richard hesitated, the baby still screaming in his arms. His knuckles were white where he gripped the infant, torn between his desperation and his pride. "Mr. Holloway," Anna said gently, "perhaps we should. I don't need suggestions from a boy who clearly—" Richard paused, looking at Elijah's worn clothes again. "Where are your parents? Why are you even traveling alone?" "My mom is sick in Chicago," Elijah answered simply, his arms still outstretched. "And I've been taking care of babies since I was 8. Mrs. Johnson pays me $5 to watch her grandson when she works nights. Mrs. Williams, too, with her twins. Sometimes I watch 4 or 5 babies at once when the mamas in our building need to pull double shifts." The blonde woman scoffed. "So you're comparing this to some babysitting job in the projects?" Elijah turned to look at her directly. "No, ma'am. I'm saying I know what different cries mean. This one," he nodded toward the baby, "that's not hunger or a dirty diaper. That's gas pain mixed with overstimulation. The pitch tells you everything if you know how to listen." Richard's expression shifted slightly, curiosity mixing with his skepticism. The baby's cries had reached a level that made several passengers cover their ears. "This is absurd," Richard muttered, but the baby chose that moment to let out a particularly painful shriek that seemed to pierce right through his father's resolve. "Fine. But if you hurt him—" "I won't," Elijah said softly, finally taking the baby into his arms. The infant was rigid with distress, his little body tight as a coiled spring. Elijah adjusted his hold immediately, bringing the baby up to his shoulder, one hand supporting his bottom, the other gently pressing against his back. He started to sway, not the jerky bouncing Richard had been doing, but a smooth, rhythmic movement like tall grass in a breeze. Then Elijah began to hum. It wasn't just any tune. It was something old, something that seemed to come from deep in his chest. The melody was simple but haunting, rising and falling like waves against a shore. His grandmother had taught it to him when he was barely 5 years old, telling him it was passed down from her own grandmother, who learned it in the fields of Alabama. The baby's cries began to hiccup. "What is that?" Anna asked, moving closer. "Just something my grandmama knew," Elijah said quietly, not breaking his rhythm. He shifted the baby slightly, his movements confident and practiced. "She said it wasn't the song that mattered, but the vibration. Babies feel it through your chest. Makes them remember being inside their mama, where everything was safe and warm." The crying was down to whimpers now. Elijah reached into his pocket with his free hand and pulled out a small cloth, clean but worn. He held it near the baby's face, not touching, just close enough for the infant to sense it. "What are you doing?" Richard demanded, half rising from his seat. "It's okay," Elijah assured him. "Babies see better with their nose than their eyes at this age. New smells upset them. This cloth smells like the lavender oil my grandmama used. Calms them right down." Sure enough, the baby's whimpers were fading. His tiny fist, which had been clenched in distress, slowly opened. He made a small sighing sound and nestled his face into Elijah's shoulder. The first-class cabin was absolutely silent. That's impossible, the polo shirt man said, but his voice had lost its mocking edge. Elijah continued swaying, the humming so quiet now it was barely audible. He began to pat the baby's back in a specific pattern. 2 gentle pats, a pause, 3 pats, a pause, repeat. The baby let out a small burp, then another. Gas bubbles, Elijah explained, glancing at Richard. The pressure changes during takeoff make it worse. You got to help them work it out, but gentle-like. Their bodies are still learning how to do things we don't even think about. The baby was now completely quiet, his breathing deep and even. Elijah carefully lowered him from his shoulder, cradling him in his arms. The infant's eyes were closed, his face peaceful, a complete transformation from minutes before. An elderly woman across the aisle, not the silver-haired one from economy, but another passenger in first class, spoke up. In my day, we understood that caring for babies wasn't about money or status. It was about heart. She looked pointedly at Richard. Sometimes it takes heart, not money. Richard's face flushed red. The comment had clearly struck deep. He watched Elijah holding his son, saw how natural it looked, how easy. Everything that had been impossible for him seemed effortless for this poor boy from economy. How? Richard finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I've read every parenting book. I have 3 different baby experts on speed dial. I bought every product recommended by. Books don't teach you how to listen, Elijah interrupted gently. Babies aren't problems to solve. They're just tiny people trying to tell you something. You got to feel what they need, not think about it. The blonde woman's husband cleared his throat. Well, regardless of methods, the child is quiet now. Perhaps we can all return to. Wait, Richard said, his eyes not leaving Elijah. Show me what you did. The pattern. Elijah nodded and carefully transferred the sleeping baby back to Richard. First, you got to relax your shoulders. Babies feel every bit of tension in your body. They're like little emotion detectors. Richard tried to relax, though his shoulders remained stiff. Now hold him up here. Elijah guided Richard's arms. Higher than you think. His head near your heartbeat. That's home base for them. And don't hold him like he's made of glass. Firm but gentle, like you're holding something precious but not fragile. The baby stirred slightly but didn't wake. Richard's expression was intense, focused like he was learning a $1 million negotiation tactic. The swaying isn't back and forth, Elijah continued, demonstrating with his own body. It's more like a figure 8, real smooth. And the humming, it doesn't matter what song. It's about the vibration. Put your whole chest into it. Richard attempted to hum, but came out forced and tuneless. The baby's face scrunched slightly. You're thinking too hard, Elijah said. What song did your mama sing to you when you were little? Richard's face went very still. My mother died when I was 3. I don't remember any songs. The cabin grew quiet again. Elijah nodded slowly, understanding passing across his young face. Then we'll teach you a new one, he said simply. One your boy will remember forever. He began to hum again, this time a different melody, simpler, easier to follow. After a moment, Richard tried to match it. His voice was uncertain, wavering, but the baby settled again. There you go, Elijah encouraged. See, he doesn't care if you're perfect. He just wants to know you're there. Anna, who had been watching the entire exchange, spoke up. That's remarkable. Richard was still swaying with the baby, getting more comfortable with the movement. His son remained peacefully asleep, one tiny hand curled against his father's chest. How does a boy like you know so much about children? Richard asked, repeating the question from before, but with genuine curiosity now instead of skepticism. Elijah's expression changed, a shadow passing over his young face. He looked out the window at the clouds below, then back at Richard. When you don't have much else, he said slowly, you learn to take care of what you do have. And where I'm from, all we really have is each other. He didn't mention the nights he'd gone hungry, so a crying baby could have formula. He didn't talk about missing school to help when Mrs. Johnson got too sick to watch her grandson. He didn't explain how he'd learned to distinguish between a hungry cry and a sick cry, because sometimes knowing the difference meant knowing whether to spend the last $5 on milk or medicine. Instead, he just smiled, a sad, wise smile that belonged on someone much older, and adjusted Richard's hand position one more time. "There," he said. "You got it now." He'll sleep for a while. When he wakes up, remember, figure 8, heartbeat close, and don't think so hard. Just feel. As Elijah turned to go back to his seat, Richard called out, "Wait." Elijah paused. "Stay," Richard said, surprising himself with the request. "In case he wakes up again, I'll clear it with the crew." Elijah glanced back at Economy, then at the sleeping baby. "Okay," he said simply, "but only because he might need me." Anna quickly arranged for Elijah to sit in the empty seat across from Richard. As he settled in, the blonde woman's husband leaned over. "You know, son, there might be opportunities for someone with your skills. Have you ever considered formal training? Nanny school, or I'm going to be a doctor," Elijah said matter-of-factly. "Pediatrician. Help babies who really need it. Soon as I figure out how to pay for college." The man sat back, seemingly at a loss for words. Richard studied Elijah over his son's sleeping form. This poor boy from the project who he would have walked past on the street without a second glance, had just taught him more about his own son in 10 minutes than all his expensive consultants had managed in 6 months. "A doctor," Richard repeated thoughtfully. "That's quite a goal. My grandmama always said, 'Aim for the moon, baby. Even if you miss, you'll land among the stars.'" Elijah's voice caught slightly. "She died last year, but I promised her I'd make something of myself. Help people like she helped everybody in our building." The baby stirred in Richard's arms, making a small sound of contentment before settling again. Richard looked down at his son, then back at Elijah. "What's his name?" Elijah asked. "Your boy." "James," Richard answered. "After his mother. She was Jamie. She died giving birth to him." The words came out flat, practiced. "Complications. The doctor said there was nothing anyone could do." Elijah nodded slowly. "That's hard. For both of you. He lost his mama, and you lost your person. No wonder he cries so much. He's grieving too, in his baby way." Richard's carefully constructed composure cracked slightly. "He's 6 months old. He can't." "Babies know," Elijah said simply. "They know when something's missing. Just like they know when someone's scared or angry or sad. He feels everything you feel, Mr. Holloway. Everything." The truth of it hit Richard like a physical blow. Every moment of his grief, his anger, his fear, his son had absorbed it all. "I don't know how to do this," Richard admitted, the words barely audible. "I don't know how to be a father. I thought I could hire people, buy things, solve it like a business problem. But he just keeps crying, and every time he cries, I hear Jamie dying, and He stopped, horrified at having revealed so much to a strange child. But Elijah just nodded. "It's okay to be scared. Being a parent is scary. My mama says she's been scared every day since I was born. But she shows up anyway. That's what love looks like, showing up even when you're scared." The plane hummed around them, carrying them through the sky at 500 miles an hour. In first class, a billionaire held his sleeping son while a 12-year-old boy in worn clothes taught him about love, loss, and the language of tears. And for the first time since his wife died, Richard Holloway began to think that maybe, just maybe, he could learn to be a father after all. The beverage cart rattled through first class 20 minutes after Elijah had calmed baby James. Richard hadn't moved, still holding his sleeping son with the careful precision Elijah had shown him. Across the aisle, Elijah sat quietly, his eyes following the flight attendants as they served drinks and snacks to the premium passengers. "What would you like, Mr. Holloway?" Anna asked, her voice soft to avoid waking the baby. "Just water," Richard replied, then glanced at Elijah. "And whatever he wants." "Oh, I'm okay," Elijah said quickly. Anna smiled warmly. "The meal service is coming up. We have chicken piccata or beef tenderloin in first class today." Elijah's stomach growled audibly, but he shook his head. "I brought something. Thank you, though." As Anna moved on, Richard watched Elijah pull out a slightly squashed peanut butter sandwich from his backpack. The boy unwrapped it carefully, as if it were precious, then rewrapped half and put it back. "Saving it for later?" Richard asked. For dinner, Elijah replied matter-of-factly. Maybe breakfast too, if the hospital doesn't have a cafeteria I can afford. Richard felt something uncomfortable twist in his chest. When a meal service came, he insisted Anna bring Elijah a tray. The boy protested at first, but Richard wouldn't hear it. You help my son. The least I can do is buy you lunch. Elijah ate slowly, savoring each bite of the chicken, but Richard noticed he wrapped the dinner roll in cookies and napkins, tucking them into his backpack. The boy was planning ahead, stretching resources, something Richard had never had to consider in his entire life. Baby James stirred in Richard's arms, his little face scrunching up. Before Richard could panic, Elijah was already moving. He's not fully awake, Elijah explained, gently stroking the baby's cheek with one finger. Sometimes they just need to know someone's there. Sure enough, James settled again, but his tiny hand caught Elijah's finger and held on tight. He likes you, Richard observed, something like envy in his voice. Babies are good judges of character, said the elderly woman from earlier, the one with the silver hair who had moved up from economy to use the first-class bathroom. She paused by their row. They know who's genuine. She looked at Elijah with grandmotherly affection. I heard what you did, young man. That was something special. Anna, returning with coffee, joined the conversation. I've been flying for 15 years, seen hundreds of crying babies, but I've never seen anything like that. Where did you really learn all this, Elijah? Elijah shifted uncomfortably under the attention, but answered honestly. My building back home, Heritage Gardens, it's mostly single mamas and grandmamas raising kids. My grandmama used to say that in our neighborhood, every child belonged to everybody. You learned to help because that's what you did. Heritage Gardens? The man in the polo shirt looked up from his laptop. Isn't that the housing project that was on the news? The one with all the shootings. Elijah's jaw tightened slightly. There's been some trouble, yes, sir. But there's good people there, too. Families just trying to get by. Tell us about your grandmother, Anna prompted gently, seeming to sense the boy's discomfort. Elijah's face softened immediately. Grandmama May was everything. Raised me since I was 2, after my daddy left and my mama got sick the first time. She worked 3 jobs, cleaning offices at night, doing laundry for rich folks during the day, and selling her sweet potato pies on weekends. Richard found himself leaning forward, drawn into the story. She never missed my school plays or parent-teacher conferences, Elijah continued. Even when she was bone-tired, she'd help me with homework. She taught me to read using her old Bible and cookbook, the only 2 books we had for the longest time. What happened to her? The elderly woman asked softly. Heart attack, Elijah said quietly. Last year, she was walking up the stairs with groceries. Our elevator's been broken for 3 years, and her heart just gave out. Mrs. Johnson found her on the 3rd-floor landing. The first-class cabin had gone quiet. Even a man in the polo shirt had stopped typing. After that, it was just me and Mama, but she was already sick again. Cancer came back. That's why I'm going to Chicago. She had to move there for treatment at a special hospital. I've been staying with neighbors, helping with their kids, to earn my keep. You've been living alone? Richard asked, incredulous. Not alone. Mrs. Johnson checks on me. Mrs. Williams, too. And I help with their babies, so it works out. I go to school, help with the kids after, do my homework while the babies sleep. It's a system. The blonde woman from earlier had been listening from her seat. Now she spoke up, her tone softer than before. How old were you when you started taking care of other people's children? 8, Elijah answered. Mama had just gotten out of the hospital from her first surgery. She couldn't work, so I started helping Mrs. Patterson with her twins for a few dollars here and there. Learned real quick that babies are easier than older kids. Babies just need love and attention. Older kids got questions you can't always answer. Baby James chose that moment to wake up properly, his blue eyes blinking open. Richard tensed, but the baby didn't cry. Instead, he looked around until he spotted Elijah, then gave what could only be described as a smile. Hey there, little man, Elijah said softly, reaching over to tickle James's foot. You have a good nap? James gurgled happily, kicking his feet. Richard watched in amazement as his son, who usually woke up crying, seemed perfectly content. He's probably hungry now, Elijah observed. You got formula in that fancy bag? Richard fumbled for the diaper bag, pulling out a pre-made bottle. It needs to be warmed. No, room temperature is fine, Elijah corrected. Babies don't need warm milk. That's just something we do to make ourselves feel better. Room temperature is easier on their stomachs anyway. Richard tried to position James for feeding, but his movements were awkward. The baby fussed, turning his head away from the bottle. Here, Elijah said, adjusting Richard's arms. 45-degree angle, not flat. And don't push the bottle. Let him control the flow. See? He knows what he needs. Sure enough, James latched onto the bottle and began drinking contentedly. You should write a book, the elderly woman said to Elijah. Real advice from someone who actually knows babies. Elijah laughed, the first genuine laugh Richard had heard from him. Who would want to read a book by a kid from the projects? People want experts with degrees, not boys with experience. Experience is expertise, Anna pointed out. You just proved that. A commotion from economy class drew their attention. A baby had started crying back there. Not as intense as James had been, but persistent. The mother's voice carried forward, stressed and apologetic. Elijah looked back, then at Richard. You okay here? I could go help. Go, Richard said, surprising himself. Help her. Elijah made his way back through the plane. Richard could hear him introducing himself, then the mother's grateful response. Within minutes, the crying had stopped. That boy's something special, Anna said to Richard. You were lucky he was on this flight. Richard looked down at James, who was still contentedly drinking his bottle. Lucky? Yes. The man in the polo shirt had been quiet for a while. Now he spoke up. You know, Holloway, that kid just did what your entire executive team probably couldn't. Maybe you should hire him. It was said as a joke, but Richard didn't laugh. He was thinking the same thing. Elijah returned, leading a grateful-looking young mother who was carrying her now calm baby. This is Maria, Elijah introduced. Her little girl just needed a position change. Reflux probably. Thank you so much, Maria gushed, looking at both Elijah and Richard as if unsure who to address. He was amazing. Showed me this hold I'd never seen before, and she stopped crying immediately. Other passengers were taking notice now. The businessman who'd been so annoyed earlier had put away his phone and was watching with interest. The nervous first-time flyer from economy had relaxed, seeming to draw comfort from the calm babies. Even the teenagers who'd been recording earlier were now just observing, their phones forgotten. Elijah, a woman from business class, called out, My sister just had a baby. Could you show me the hold you used? I want to help her when I visit. Soon, Elijah was giving an impromptu lesson in the aisle, demonstrating different holds and techniques. Richard watched, still feeding James, as this 12-year-old boy commanded the attention of adults who probably wouldn't have given him a second glance on the street. The football hold is good for gassy babies, Elijah was explaining, cradling an imaginary infant along his forearm. And this one, my grandmama called it the tree branch. That's for colicky babies. They like the pressure on their tummy. What about sleep? Asked a grandmother traveling to see her new grandchild. My daughter says the baby won't sleep unless someone's holding her. That's normal, Elijah assured her. First 3 months, they're still learning they're not inside their mama anymore. The world's big and scary. You gotta make them feel contained, safe. Swaddling helps, but it's gotta be tight, tighter than you think. He demonstrated with the airline blanket, showing the precise folding technique. But not too tight on the hips. They need room to move their legs. The blonde woman's husband cleared his throat. How do you know all this isn't harmful? I mean, you're not trained. Actually, Anna interjected, everything he's demonstrating is exactly what we learned in our infant emergency training. The airline brings in pediatric specialists to teach us. This young man knows his stuff. Elijah blushed at the praise, but continued answering questions. Richard noticed how patient he was, how he never talked down to anyone despite being the youngest person in the conversation. What do you want in life, kid? Richard asked suddenly, the question cutting through the chatter. Everyone turned to look at them. Elijah went very still, his eyes meeting Richard's. What do you mean? Your future. Your dreams. What do you want? Elijah was quiet for a long moment, considering. I want my mama to get better, he said finally. I want to finish school, become a doctor like I promised my grandmama, help kids who don't have anyone else to help them. That's all. Elijah's voice dropped to almost a whisper. Just a chance. That's all anybody really needs. Just a chance. The plane lurched suddenly, dropping several feet before stabilizing. The seatbelt sign dinged on immediately, and the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we've encountered some unexpected weather. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. We're expecting moderate to severe turbulence for the next 15 to 20 minutes. Passengers scrambled back to their seats. Elijah quickly made his way to Richard's row, but instead of taking the seat across the aisle, he positioned himself next to Richard and James. Hold him tight, but not rigid, Elijah instructed as the plane shook again. If you're tense, he'll feel it and panic. But Richard was already tensing. His knuckles were white on the armrest, his breathing shallow. The plane dropped again, and several passengers screamed. James started to cry, picking up on his father's fear. Mr. Holloway, Elijah said calmly. Look at me. Richard's eyes were wide with barely controlled panic. I don't like. I know, Elijah said, but your boy needs you to be calm. Breathe with me. In through your nose, out through your mouth. The plane shuddered violently. A bag fell from an overhead compartment. Richard's breathing got worse. My wife, Richard gasped. She was supposed to be on a plane when she went into labor. If she had been, maybe the doctors could have. Maybe she wouldn't have. Stop, Elijah said firmly. He took the crying James from Richard's shaking arms. That's not what happened. You can't live in maybes. With one arm securing James against his chest, Elijah used his free hand to grip Richard's shoulder. Feel my breathing. Match it. The plane bucked like an angry horse. The lights flickered. Someone in economy was crying. But Elijah remained steady, a fixed point in the chaos. He hummed the same tune from before, rocking James gently despite the turbulence. When I was 7, Elijah said, his voice cutting through Richard's panic, our building caught fire. 3rd floor, Mrs. Patterson's apartment. Everyone was screaming, running. But my grandmama, she just picked me up and said, baby, when the world shakes, you be the steady thing. She walked us out of that building like we were taking a Sunday stroll. Richard focused on Elijah's voice, on the steady rise and fall of the boy's chest. The fire took everything we had, Elijah continued. Photos, clothes, her Bible. But you know what she said? Things are just things. We still got what matters. Next day, she was helping Mrs. Patterson find a new place to stay. The plane dropped again, but Richard's breathing was starting to regulate. Your wife, Elijah said gently. She gave you that beautiful boy. That's what she left you. Not the maybe could haves, but him, James. He's here, and he needs his daddy to be strong. Richard's eyes filled with tears. I don't know how to be strong. I've been running companies since I was 25, but I can't even hold my own son without him crying. Because you're scared, Elijah said simply. Not of him, of loving him, of losing him like you lost her. The truth of it hit Richard like another bout of turbulence. My mama almost died when I was born, Elijah shared. Grandmama told me she was in the ICU for 2 weeks. Daddy couldn't handle it, left before she even woke up. But Mama, when she finally came home and held me for the first time, you know what she said? She said, every second of pain was worth it for you. James had stopped crying, soothed by Elijah's steady presence despite the plane's continued shaking. Your wife, Elijah continued, she'd say the same thing. I know it. Mamas always do. The elderly woman across the aisle, gripping her armrests, spoke up shakily. The boy's right, Mr. Holloway. I lost my husband 2 years ago. Thought I'd never want to love anything again. Then my daughter had a baby. First time I held my granddaughter, I realized love isn't something that runs out. It multiplies. The plane shook violently again. The man in the polo shirt had his eyes closed, muttering what sounded like prayers. The blonde woman was clutching her husband's hand. But in the midst of it all, Elijah began teaching Richard. Put your hand here, he said, guiding Richard's palm to James's back. Feel his breathing. Let yours match his. Babies breathe perfect. They haven't learned to hold their breath from fear yet. Richard did as instructed, feeling the rapid but steady rise and fall of his son's tiny chest. "Now talk to him," Elijah said. "Tell him about his mama." "I can't." "You can. He needs to know her through you." Richard swallowed hard. The plane bucked again, but he kept his hand on James's back. "Your mother," he began hesitantly, his voice barely audible over the sound of the engines, "was named Jamie. She had hair like sunshine and a laugh that could fill a room. She was brave, so much braver than me." James's eyes found his father's face, seeming to focus intently. "She wanted you so much," Richard continued, tears now flowing freely. "We tried for 5 years. 3 miscarriages. The doctor said it might never happen. But she never gave up. She said you were worth waiting for." The turbulence was starting to ease, but no one seemed to notice. Everyone nearby was listening to Richard's story. "When we finally found out she was pregnant with you, she cried for an hour. Happy tears. She bought a dozen baby books that same day, started planning your nursery, picking out names. She said you were her miracle." Elijah carefully transferred James back to Richard's arms. This time, Richard held him with confidence, naturally. "The day you were born," Richard continued, looking directly at his son, "she held you for exactly 12 minutes. She kissed your forehead and told you to be good for Daddy. She said she loved you enough for a lifetime, all packed into those 12 minutes. The plane had stabilized completely now, but Richard kept talking, the words pouring out like water from a broken dam. "I've been so angry," he admitted. "At the doctors, at God, at her for leaving, at you for—" He stopped, horrified at what he'd almost said. "For surviving when she didn't." Elijah finished gently. "That's okay. Feelings don't make sense sometimes. My mama felt guilty for years that she lived when her sister died in the same car accident. Guilt and grief, they get all tangled up." The captain's voice came on again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've cleared the weather system. Should be smooth flying from here to Chicago." But the moment wasn't broken. Richard was still looking at his son with new eyes, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. "He has her eyes," Richard said wonderingly. "I never let myself see it before." "He has your chin, though," Elijah pointed out with a small smile. "And look, he's got your serious face when he's thinking." Richard actually laughed, a surprised, genuine sound. James responded with a gurgle and a smile of his own. "There it is," the elderly woman said warmly. "That's what was missing. Connection." The man in the polo shirt had opened his eyes and was watching the scene with something like awe. "Kid," he said to Elijah, "you just did more than calm a baby. You just saved a family." Elijah shook his head. They were never broken, just needed to find each other. Anna appeared in the aisle, having made her way forward as soon as it was safe. "Is everyone all right here?" "Better than all right," Richard said, not taking his eyes off James. "Actually better." The blonde woman spoke up unexpectedly. "Young man, Elijah, I owe you an apology. I made assumptions based on appearances. That was wrong of me." Her husband nodded in agreement. "What you did here, keeping everyone calm, helping Mr. Holloway, that took real courage and wisdom." Elijah ducked his head, uncomfortable with the praise. "Just did what needed doing." "No," Richard said firmly. "You did so much more than that." He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "Elijah, where are you staying in Chicago?" "With my mom at the hospital, I hope. They usually let me sleep in the chair by her bed if I'm quiet. And after, when she's released," Elijah shrugged. "Haven't thought that far ahead. One day at a time, my grandmama always said." Richard looked at his son, then at Elijah. "You've done more for my son today than I have in his whole life," he said quietly, repeating what he'd said earlier, but with deeper meaning now. The weight of the statement hung in the air. The other passengers seemed to hold their breath, sensing something important was happening. "Mr. Holloway," Elijah said carefully, "you just needed someone to show you how. That's all. You're his daddy. That's what matters." "But I still need to learn," Richard admitted. "So much to learn." The plane continued its journey through the now calm sky, carrying a billionaire who was finally learning to be a father, a boy wise beyond his years, and a baby who had unknowingly brought them together. Outside the windows, the clouds had parted, revealing clear blue sky stretching endlessly toward Chicago. The turbulence was now just a memory, and the cabin had settled into an unusual calm. Sunlight streamed through the windows as they flew over Indiana farmland, creating patterns of gold and green far below. James slept peacefully in Richard's arms, and for the first time since his son was born, Richard wasn't anxious about holding him. Elijah had returned to organizing his backpack, carefully arranging the wrapped dinner roll and cookies he'd saved from lunch. He pulled out a small notebook, its pages worn and filled with cramped handwriting. "What's that?" Richard asked, genuinely curious. "Just notes," Elijah replied, but Richard could see medical terms written on the visible page. Words like tachycardia and bronchiolitis. "Medical notes?" Elijah nodded. "I copy stuff from the library computers when I can get time on them. Print limits are 3 pages a day, so I write everything down by hand. Been studying childhood diseases, basic symptoms. Helps me know when the babies in my building need a real doctor and when they just need rest." Richard stared at the boy. "You're 12 years old and studying medical conditions in your spare time? Not much else to do when you're watching sleeping babies," Elijah said with a small shrug. "Plus, doctors are expensive. If I can tell Mrs. Johnson that her grandson just has a cold and not RSV, that'd save her a trip to the ER she can't afford." The elderly woman leaned forward. "Young man, have you ever considered applying for programs? Scholarships? With your natural abilities and that kind of dedication. Applications cost money," Elijah said simply. "SAT prep, application fees, even getting transcripts sent places. It all adds up. And I can't leave my mama right now anyway." Anna, who had been listening while tidying the galley, spoke up. "There are fee waivers for her." "I know," Elijah interrupted gently. "But fee waivers need counselor signatures, and my counselor has 300 kids to worry about. Half the time, she doesn't even know my name. It's okay. I'll figure it out when the time comes." Richard felt something shifting inside him, like tectonic plates realigning. Here was this brilliant child, teaching himself medicine from library computers, restricted to 3 printed pages a day, while Richard's company donated millions to universities that already had billions in endowments. "Elijah," he began carefully, "where does your mother get treatment?" "County General on the south side. It's not the best, but they have a program for people who can't pay. The wait times are long, and she doesn't always see the same doctor, but they're keeping her stable." "What kind of cancer?" "Lymphoma. Stage 3. The doctors say if she can finish this round of chemo, she might go into remission. But she keeps having to stop treatment when she gets too weak." Richard made a mental note. His company had just funded a new cancer center at Northwestern Memorial. The head of oncology owed him several favors. Baby James stirred, making small sounds of waking. Before Richard could panic about what to do, Elijah was already pulling out a clean cloth from his backpack. "Mom, put this on your shoulder," he suggested. "Babies that age, they spit up right after naps sometimes. Your suit looks expensive." Richard took the cloth, thin and worn, but meticulously clean. "Thank you." As James woke fully, he didn't cry. Instead, he looked around with curious eyes, his gaze landing on Elijah. He reached out his tiny hand. "He really does like you," Richard said, allowing Elijah to take James's outstretched hand. "Baby's no good people," the man in the polo shirt said. He'd been quiet since the turbulence, but had clearly been doing some thinking. "My name's Bradley, by the way. Bradley Cooper. And yes, I've heard all the jokes." He extended his hand to Elijah, who shook it politely. "I owe you an apology, too," Bradley continued. "I said some pretty nasty things earlier. You've got more class and wisdom than most adults I know, including myself." The blonde woman and her husband introduced themselves as well, Jennifer and Thomas Whitman. The elderly woman was Eleanor Morrison. Soon, half the first-class cabin was engaged in conversation, with Elijah at the center, though he seemed uncomfortable with the attention. "So your grandmother's lullaby," Eleanor asked, "the one you were humming, where did it come from originally?" Elijah's face softened at the memory. "She said her grandmother taught it to her, and that grandmother learned it from hers, all the way back to slavery times. It wasn't written down anywhere, just passed along. She used to say songs were how our people carried history when they weren't allowed to write it down." "Would you sing it for us?" Jennifer asked. The actual words? Elijah looked uncertain. I'm not much of a singer. Please, Richard said quietly. I'd like James to hear it properly. After a moment, Elijah began to sing softly. Hush now, baby. Don't you cry, Mama's going to sing you a lullaby. Stars are dancing in the sky, morning comes by and by. Rest your head and close your eyes. Tomorrow brings a new sunrise. Dreams will carry you away till you wake to another day. His voice was young, but carried a weight of history, of countless mothers and grandmothers who had sung these same words to frightened children through decades of hardship. James seemed mesmerized, his blue eyes fixed on Elijah's face. Richard found his own eyes misting. That's beautiful, Eleanor whispered. You're carrying your grandmother with you. She's all I got left of her, Elijah said. That and her sweet potato pie recipe, but I can't afford to make it right now. Maybe someday. Richard made a decision. Elijah, I need to ask you something. The boy looked at him expectantly. What would you say if I offered you a job? The cabin went quiet. Elijah blinked in surprise. A job? Helping me with James. Teaching me what you know. You could stay at my house in Chicago. I have a mansion in Lincoln Park with more empty rooms than I can count. Your mother could stay too when she's released. I could arrange for her to get treatment at Northwestern with the best doctors. Elijah was very still, his face unreadable. That's a lot, Mr. Halloway. It's not charity, Richard said quickly. You be working, teaching me, helping with James. I'd pay you a proper salary. I'm 12. You're exceptional. Elijah looked at James, then at Richard, then out the window at the clouds below. What about school? There's an excellent private school near my home. Full scholarship. I'm on the board. The other passengers were watching like this was a tennis match, heads turning between Richard and Elijah. Mr. Halloway, Elijah said carefully, that's real generous, but I don't want to be anyone's charity case. And I don't want to leave my community behind. Those kids, those mamas, they need me too. Then we'll figure out a way for you to help them too, Richard said, surprising himself with the words. Maybe through my foundation. We could create a program, something that teaches what you know to others. Bradley spoke up. Kid, most people would jump at this chance. I'm not most people, Elijah replied simply. And jumping at things without thinking is how you end up falling. Eleanor smiled approvingly. Wise words. What if, Richard said slowly, we start small? You come stay for a week while your mother's in the hospital. Help me establish routines with James. See how it feels. No long-term commitment. Just a trial. Elijah considered this. And my mama gets treatment? The best treatment available. And I can still help the families in my building? We'll work out a way. Elijah looked at James again. The baby was playing with Elijah's finger, gurgling happily. Can I think about it? Elijah asked. Talk to my mama first? Of course, Richard said, though he was anxious for an answer. The captain's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our initial descent into Chicago O'Hare. We should be on the ground in about 30 minutes. As the plane began its descent, Richard refined his offer. Here's what I'm thinking, Elijah. You spend a few days with us after we land. I'll have my driver take you to see your mother tonight. In fact, we can go straight from the airport. You can stay in our guest suite. Help me learn James's routines. Elijah listened carefully, his young face serious. And what exactly would you want me to do? Teach me what you know. Help me understand my son. Not as a replacement parent. I need to learn to be his father. But you could be a mentor, I suppose. As strange as that sounds given our ages. I have conditions, Elijah said, with a maturity that continued to astound everyone listening. Richard raised an eyebrow. Conditions? First, I see my mama tonight before anything else. Second, I keep my own clothes, my own things. I don't want to be dressed up like some kind of doll. Third, no pictures, no social media, no using me for good publicity. Jennifer whispered to her husband, this kid's negotiating with a billionaire and winning. And Elijah continued, you have to promise to actually learn. I'm not there to be your permanent babysitter. I'll teach you what I know, but you have to do the work. When I leave, and I will leave eventually, you need to be able to take care of James on your own. Richard nodded slowly. Those are fair terms. I accept. Suddenly, James began crying, a sharp, pained cry that was different from before. The descent had started in earnest, and the pressure change was affecting his ears. Ear pressure, Elijah said immediately, already moving. This happens a lot during descent. Babies can't pop their ears like we can. He asked Anna for a warm, damp napkin and a clean bottle cap. The flight attendant, who had been watching everything unfold, quickly provided both. "What are you doing?" Thomas asked, leaning over to watch. "Creating steam to help open his eustachian tubes," Elijah explained while working. He created a small cup with a napkin and held it near, but not touching, James's ear. The warm moisture helps. And this, he gently massaged a spot behind James's jaw, is a pressure point that can help with ear pain. He then encouraged Richard to give James his pacifier. The sucking motion helps equalize pressure. Same reason adults chew gum on planes. Within moments, James's cries softened to whimpers, then stopped entirely. The baby looked relieved, his little body relaxing. "That's incredible," Anna said, pulling out a small notebook. "I'm writing this down. Do you mind if I share this with other flight crews? We deal with this problem constantly." "Share it with everyone," Elijah said. "Knowledge that helps babies should be free." The descent continued, and Elijah kept James comfortable with a combination of gentle pressure point massage and repositioning. Richard watched every movement, trying to memorize the techniques. 2 rows back, a sleek woman in a black suit had been watching everything with sharp eyes. She pulled out her phone and began texting rapidly. Richard noticed her for the first time. "Harper," he said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" Harper Voss, Richard's head of PR, stood and moved forward. "I took an earlier flight, but missed it, so I ended up on this one. I've been watching this situation develop." Her tone was cold, professional. She looked at Elijah with calculating eyes. "Mr. Halloway, we need to discuss the optics of this. A billionaire taking in a child from the projects? The media will have a field day. We need to control the narrative." "There is no narrative," Richard said firmly. "This is a private arrangement." "Nothing's private when you're worth $8 billion, Harper replied. She pulled out a tablet, showing a social media post. Someone already posted a video. "Billionaire can't calm his own baby, needs help from poor kid." It's getting thousands of views. Elijah saw himself on the screen, holding James during the turbulence. Someone had filmed the whole thing. "I didn't agree to be filmed," Elijah said quietly. "Welcome to the modern world," Harper said dismissively. "Everything's content now." She turned to Richard. "We need to get ahead of this. I can draft a statement about your foundation's new youth mentorship program. Make it look planned." "No," Richard said sharply. "We're not using Elijah for publicity." "Then we need him to sign an NDA. Non-disclosure agreement," she added, seeing Elijah's confused look. "Basically, you can't talk about Mr. Halloway or his family to anyone." "Harper, that's enough. I'm protecting your interests, Richard. And your son's. Do you want this boy selling his story to the highest bidder?" The cabin had gone cold. Everyone was staring at Harper with varying degrees of disgust. "I would never," Elijah said, his voice steady but hurt. "I helped because it was right, not for money or fame." Eleanor spoke up, her voice icy. "Young woman, that child has shown more integrity in the last 2 hours than you just displayed in 2 minutes. Bradley nodded in agreement. "If anyone needs an NDA, it's you, lady." Harper's phone buzzed. She looked at it, and her face paled slightly. "Richard, there's a situation. Someone called airport security. They're saying a minor was endangering your child on the flight." "What?" Richard exclaimed. Anna immediately spoke up. "That's absolutely false. I witnessed everything. Elijah helped. He never endangered anyone." "Nevertheless," Harper said, "security will be waiting when we land. We need to control this." The captain's voice interrupted. "Flight attendants, please prepare for landing." Everyone had to return to their seats. Elijah moved back across the aisle, but Richard reached out and caught his arm. "Don't worry," he said. "I won't let anyone twist what you did." As the plane descended through the clouds, Chicago spreading out below them, Elijah held his worn backpack and watched the city approach. Somewhere down there, his mother lay in a hospital bed. Somewhere down there, a new chapter of his life might be beginning, or ending before it could start. The wheels touched down with a gentle bump. As the plane taxied to the gate, Harper was already on her phone, speaking rapidly to someone. Richard held James, who remained calm thanks to Elijah's techniques. "Elijah," Richard said as the plane came to a stop, "whatever happens at the gate, I've got your back. You have my word." The seatbelt sign dinged off. Passengers began gathering their belongings, but there was a tension in the air. Everyone seemed aware that something was about to happen. As the door opened, 2 airport security officers appeared at the entrance. Harper immediately stepped forward, but Richard stood up first, James in his arms. "Officers," he said in his commanding CEO voice, "I'm Richard Holloway. I understand there's been some misunderstanding about this flight." One officer consulted his tablet. "We received a report that a minor was interfering with your infant, possibly endangering the child." "That's completely false," Richard said firmly. "Elijah Washington helped my son when I couldn't. He possibly saved this entire flight from hours of disruption." Anna stepped forward with her flight log. "I have documentation of everything that happened, time-stamped and verified." Eleanor, Bradley, Jennifer, Thomas, and at least a dozen other passengers all spoke up at once, defending Elijah. The security officers looked overwhelmed by the unified response. Additionally, Anna continued, pulling out her service tablet, "I have the passenger manifest here." The complaint came from seat 5B. She looked directly at a young woman with her phone out, the influencer who'd been filming. That passenger was recording without consent and created a false narrative. The influencer went red. "I was just documenting." "You were lying," Jennifer said bluntly. "We all saw what really happened." The security officers looked between the crowd of defensive passengers and the increasingly embarrassed influencer. "It seems this was a misunderstanding," one officer said, "though we'll need to file a report." "File whatever you need," Richard said. "But be clear, Elijah Washington is a hero, not a threat. And if anyone suggests otherwise, they'll be hearing from my legal team." Harper tried once more. "Richard, we should still consider." "Harper," Richard turned to her, his voice cold. "You're suspended, effective immediately. Your behavior today has been unconscionable." She stared at him in shock. "You can't be serious. I'm trying to protect. You're trying to control. There's a difference. Please gather your things and leave." As Harper stormed off, the security officers completed their brief report and left, satisfied that no actual incident had occurred. The influencer slunk away, deleting her video after several passengers threatened their own legal action. Finally, it was just Richard, James, Elijah, and the core group of passengers who'd become unlikely allies during the flight. "Well," Eleanor said, gathering her bags, "this has been the most interesting flight of my 78 years. She handed Elijah a business card. "I run a foundation for gifted children from disadvantaged backgrounds. When you're ready for college, call me." Bradley shook Elijah's hand. "You taught me something today, kid, about judging people and about what really matters." He handed Richard a card as well. "I invest in medical technology. If you ever start that program you mentioned, teaching these techniques I want in." Jennifer and Thomas each hugged Elijah, making him blush. "You're going to do great things," Jennifer said, "with or without anyone's help." Anna knelt down to Elijah's level. "Thank you for teaching me. I've been flying for 15 years, and I learned more about calming babies from you than from all our training combined." As they prepared to leave the plane, Richard looked at Elijah. "So, will you come with us? At least to start? My driver is waiting, and we can go straight to see your mother." Elijah looked at James, who was reaching for him with chubby hands. He looked at Richard, who for all his billions seemed genuinely lost when it came to the thing that mattered most. He thought of his mother, sick and alone in a hospital bed. He thought of his grandmother's words, "When God opens a door, don't stand there wondering why. Walk through and see where it leads." "Okay," he said finally, "but we see my mama first. And Mr. Holloway." "Yes. Tomorrow, you're on diaper duty. All day. That's lesson 1. The messy stuff is part of loving someone." Richard actually smiled. "Deal." As they walked off the plane together, the billionaire, his baby, and the boy from the projects, airport workers and passengers stopped to stare. They made an unlikely trio, but something about the way they moved together, the baby reaching between them, the boy's confident stride despite his worn clothes, the billionaire's protective posture over both children, suggested this was the beginning of something extraordinary. Outside the airport, Chicago's skyline stretched before them, full of possibility and uncertainty in equal measure. The security office at O'Hare was cramped and fluorescent lit, a stark contrast to the first-class cabin they'd just left. Richard sat with James in his arms, while Elijah stood calmly beside them, his backpack still slung over one shoulder. Anna had insisted on accompanying them, her flight log clutched in her hands. The head of security, a stern-faced woman named Officer Martinez, reviewed the tablet in front of her. So we have a complaint filed via social media about child endangerment, but 17 passengers have already called or messaged to dispute it. That's correct, Richard said, his voice carrying the same authority he used in boardrooms. The video being circulated was edited to remove context. Elijah was helping, not harming. The door burst open and Harper strode in, having somehow talked her way past the outer office. Richard, I've managed to contain this. I've got 3 news outlets agreed to spike the story if we give them exclusive. Harper, you're suspended, Richard reminded her coldly. You have no authority to make deals on my behalf. Don't be naive, Richard. By tomorrow morning, this will be everywhere. Billionaire's baby crisis at 30,000 feet. The board will. The board will see a father learning to care for his son with help from a remarkable young man. Nothing more. Officer Martinez held up her hand. Ma'am, if you're not directly involved in this incident, I need you to leave. Harper's eyes flashed dangerously. This isn't over, Richard. You're making a mistake. She pulled out her phone, and Elijah caught a glimpse of her typing. Liability assessment needed minor from projects. After Harper left, Officer Martinez turned to Elijah. Son, tell me exactly what happened. Elijah recounted the events simply and clearly, without embellishment. When he demonstrated the holding techniques he'd used, even Officer Martinez seemed impressed. Where did you learn all this? She asked. Life experience, ma'am. Taking care of babies in my building since I was 8. Anna presented her documentation, showing timestamps of each interaction. As you can see, Elijah's intervention came at the request of multiple passengers who were disturbed by the crying. He approached respectfully and only acted with Mr. Holloway's permission. The door opened again, and this time it was the influencer from the plane, whose name they learned was Madison Taylor. She had over 2 million followers and looked less confident than she had on the plane. I want to clarify my statement, she said quickly, her phone recording. I may have misinterpreted. Turn off the phone, Officer Martinez ordered. This is an official investigation, not content creation. Madison reluctantly complied. Without her camera, she seemed smaller, younger. I didn't mean for it to blow up like this, she admitted. I just thought it would be interesting content. Rich guy can't handle his baby. Poor kid saves the day. It's a great story. It's people's lives, Elijah said quietly. Not a story. Madison had the grace to look ashamed. I'll delete everything. Post a retraction. The damage is already done, Richard said, showing his own phone. The video had been reshared thousands of times. Comments ranged from praise for Elijah to cruel speculation about his motives. James started to fuss, and without thinking, Richard began the swaying motion Elijah had taught him. The baby settled immediately. Officer Martinez watched with interest. Seems like the young man did teach you something valuable, she observed. More than he knows, Richard agreed. After another 20 minutes of statements and paperwork, Officer Martinez closed her tablet. There's no crime here, no endangerment, just a good kid helping out. Case closed. As they prepared to leave, she pulled Elijah aside. Son, I see a lot of bad in this job. It's nice to be reminded there are still good people, especially young people like you. Outside the security office, a small crowd had gathered. Word had spread through the airport about the incident, and several passengers from their flight were waiting. Eleanor Morrison was there, talking animatedly with Bradley Cooper. The Whitmans stood nearby, and at least a dozen other passengers had stayed to show support. Everything sorted? Bradley asked. All clear, Richard confirmed. Good, Eleanor said, because I was prepared to call my nephew. He's a federal judge. She winked at Elijah. Us good people have to stick together. A man in a county general hospital uniform approached hesitantly. Excuse me, are you Elijah Washington? Elijah's face went pale. Is my mama okay? Oh, yes. Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you. I'm David, one of the nurses. Your mother saw the news and sent me to find you. She's actually doing better today. Worried about you, though. The news? Elijah asked. David showed his phone. The video had made local Chicago news, but the angle had shifted. Instead of mockery, the headline read, Young hero helps billionaire's baby on flight. We need to get you to your mother, Richard said immediately. David, we're coming with you. The ride to County General was in Richard's private Mercedes, with a driver who navigated Chicago traffic expertly. Elijah sat quietly, staring out the window as they moved from the wealthy airport area through increasingly run-down neighborhoods. James was in his car seat between them, holding onto Elijah's finger. Your mother, Richard began carefully. Tell me more about her condition. Lymphoma, like I said. Stage 3. She's been fighting it for 3 years. Gets better, then worse, then better again. The doctors say if she could just get consistent treatment without interruptions, she might beat it. But every time she has to skip treatments because of money or because the hospital's overwhelmed. That changes today, Richard said firmly. I meant what I said about Northwestern Memorial. Elijah looked at him skeptically. Those kinds of places don't just take people like us. They do when I call. The cancer center there exists because of my donations. They'll take her. County General's cancer ward was a world away from the gleaming halls of Northwestern Memorial that Richard knew. The walls were industrial beige, the floors scuffed linoleum, and the overwhelming smell of disinfectant couldn't quite mask other, sadder odors. Elijah led the way with the confidence of someone who'd walked these halls many times. Nurses greeted him by name, and several stopped Richard to ask if that was really his baby from the news. Room 314 was at the end of the hall. Through the small window in the door, Richard could see a woman who looked far too young to be as sick as she clearly was. Denise Washington was perhaps 35, with Elijah's same warm eyes, though hers were sunken with illness. She was trying to sit up in bed, reaching for something just out of reach. Elijah burst through the door. Mama, baby. Denise's voice was weak, but full of joy. I saw you on the news. Are you okay? They said something about security. I'm fine, Mama. Everything's fine. Elijah hugged her carefully, mindful of the 4 lines and monitors. This is Mr. Halloway and his son James. Denise's eyes widened as she took in Richard's expensive suit and watch. Mr. Halloway, thank you for bringing my boy. Your son helped me more than I can express, Richard said, entering the room. The space was tiny, barely room for one visitor's chair. A stack of overdue bills sat on the bedside table, and Denise quickly covered them with a magazine. He's always been helpful, Denise said, her hand stroking Elijah's head. Even as a baby, he never liked seeing people upset. James made a small sound, and Denise's face lit up. Oh, what a beautiful baby. May I? Richard hesitated, then carefully placed James in Denise's arms, supporting them both. Despite her weakness, she held the baby with practiced ease. Hello, sweet boy, she cooed. James immediately settled, seeming to sense her maternal nature. Elijah, remember when you were this small? Mama, Elijah said, embarrassed but smiling. He was the best baby, Denise told Richard. Barely cried, always watching everything with those big eyes. His grandmother said he was an old soul from day one. A harsh coughing fit interrupted her, and Elijah immediately helped her, rubbing her back and adjusting her pillows. Richard took James back, noting how naturally Elijah shifted into caregiver mode. Mrs. Washington, Richard began. Denise, please. Denise, I'd like to discuss something with you. He explained his offer to Elijah, the job, the education, and most importantly, the medical care. I can have you transferred to Northwestern Memorial tonight. Their cancer center is world-class. Denise's eyes filled with tears. I can't accept charity. It's not charity, Elijah interrupted. I'd be working, teaching him about James. Baby, you're 12. And I know things he needs to know. Things money can't buy. Elijah took his mother's hand. Mama, this could be our chance. The chance to get you better. Denise looked between her son and Richard, torn between pride and desperation. What would people say? My boy working for a billionaire. They'd say you raised a remarkable son, Richard said firmly. One who's wise beyond his years and has a gift that can't be taught. Before Denise could respond, the door opened and Harper appeared with a man in an expensive suit. Richard, this is Kenneth Frost from Legal, she said, ignoring his glare. We need to discuss liability issues immediately. Harper, I told you. The board called an emergency meeting, she interrupted. They're concerned about the optics and the potential legal ramifications of bringing a minor into your home. Kenneth stepped forward with a thick folder. Mr. Holloway, while your intentions are admirable, we need proper documentation. Work permits for a minor, liability waivers, background checks. He's 12 years old, Richard said incredulously, which is exactly the problem. Child labor laws. I'm not employing him as laborer, Richard snapped. He's a tutor, a consultant. Elijah stood up. If you need to check my background, go ahead. I've never been in trouble, never been arrested. You can talk to my teachers, my neighbors, anyone. It's not about that, Kenneth said, pulling out papers. We need agreements. Non disclosure agreements, indemnity clauses. No. Everyone turned to look at Elijah. No NDAs, he said firmly. I'm not signing something that says I can't talk about my own life. And I'm not for sale. Harper's face hardened. Then this arrangement can't happen. Richard, the liability alone. I'll sign whatever protects Mr. Holloway and James, Elijah said. But I won't sign away my voice. My grandmama always said, your voice is your power. Don't ever give it away. Anna, who had been standing in the doorway, spoke up. Maybe I can help. I have a brother who's a lawyer. He does family law, helps with guardianship and child welfare cases. He could draw up something fair to everyone. Richard nodded gratefully. Call him. While Anna made the call, a doctor entered, a tired-looking resident who seemed surprised by the crowd. Mrs. Washington? I have your test results. He paused, noticing Richard. I'm sorry, family only. They're family, Denise said quickly. Please, what do the results say? The doctor sighed. Your white cell count is dropping again. We need to restart treatment immediately, but... He glanced at the bills on the table. There's the matter of your account balance. How much? Richard asked. Sir, I can't discuss. I'm taking responsibility for all of Denise's medical expenses. How much? The doctor looked at Denise, who nodded. Current balance is $47,000. The next round of treatment will be approximately $30,000 more. Richard pulled out his phone and made a call. Yes, this is Richard Holloway. I need a medical account established at County General immediately. Initial deposit of $200,000. Beneficiary is Denise Washington. Harper grabbed his arm. Richard, you can't just... He shook her off. Yes, I can. My money, my choice. Within minutes, the hospital's financial administrator arrived, documents were signed, and Denise's account was cleared. The doctor, looking stunned, promised to begin treatment immediately and arrange for her transfer to Northwestern Memorial, Richard added. Tonight, if possible. Mr. Holloway, Denise said, tears streaming down her face. I don't know how to thank you. Raise your son to keep being who he is. That's thanks enough. Anna's brother arrived within the hour. A young, earnest lawyer named Marcus who specialized in protecting children's rights. He listened to everyone's concerns and began drafting an agreement on his laptop. Here's what I propose, Marcus said. Elijah serves as a child care consultant and mentor. Limited hours that don't interfere with school. Full access to his mother at all times. No publicity requirements. Either party can terminate with 24 hours notice. And most importantly, Elijah retains all rights to his own story and experience. That's too loose, Harper protested. What if he writes a tell-all book? Then maybe you should treat him well enough that he only has good things to say, Eleanor Morrison said. She'd arrived at the hospital, having tracked them down. I've brought Bradley and the Whitmans. We wanted to make sure everything was handled properly. The small hospital room was now packed with unlikely allies. all there to support a boy they'd met just hours ago on a plane. "I'll sign it," Richard said, reading through Marcus's agreement. "It's fair." "Elijah," Denise asked, "what do you think?" Elijah read through the agreement carefully, asking Marcus to explain certain terms. Then he looked at James, who was fussing in Richard's arms. "Can I?" he asked, and Richard handed him a baby. Immediately, James calmed, grabbing onto Elijah's shirt. "I think," Elijah said slowly, "that sometimes life puts you where you need to be. Grandmama always said God works through people. Maybe this is his way of working." He looked at Richard. "But I need you to understand something. Where I come from, we take care of each other because we have to, not for money or fame. If I do this, I'm not changing who I am. I'm not becoming someone else to fit into your world. I wouldn't want you to," Richard said sincerely. "You're perfect as you are." Harper made a disgusted sound. "This is a mistake, Richard. The board will. The board will recognize that I'm finally learning to be a father," Richard cut her off. "And if they don't, I'll find new board. Harper, clean out your office. You're done." She stared at him in shock, then stormed out, already on her phone with someone. Marcus finished the agreement, printed it using the hospital's printer, and everyone signed. Richard, Denise as Elijah's guardian, and Elijah himself in careful, neat handwriting. "It's official then," Marcus said. "Congratulations, Elijah. You're now the youngest childcare consultant in Chicago." Bradley laughed. "Probably in the country." As they prepared to leave for Northwestern Memorial, where Denise would be transferred, Elijah pulled Richard aside. "Mr. Halloway?" "Richard. Please call me Richard." "Richard, thank you. Not just for the job or helping my mama, but for seeing me. Most rich people look right through kids like me." Richard felt his throat tighten. "You know what I see when I look at you, Elijah?" "What?" "The teacher I desperately need. The son Jamie would have been proud of. The future doctor who's going to change lives." He paused. "The boy who saved my relationship with my son." Elijah smiled. A real, 12-year-old smile that reminded everyone that despite his wisdom and experience, he was still just a child. "Tomorrow, we start for real," Elijah said. "First lesson, diapers. All day. No backing out." Richard laughed, a genuine sound that surprised him. "I'm ready." As they left County General, Richard carrying James, Elijah supporting his mother, their unlikely group of supporters following, the sun was setting over Chicago. The day that had started with a crying baby on a plane was ending with the formation of an unusual family, bound not by blood but by choice, necessity, and the simple recognition that sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places. At Northwestern Memorial, Denise was admitted immediately to a private room with a view of Lake Michigan. As she settled into the bed, so much more comfortable than County General's, she held Elijah's hand. "Baby, are you sure about this?" "I'm sure, Mama. It feels right. Your grandmother would be proud." "I know," Elijah said softly. I can almost hear her saying, "See, baby? I told you God had a plan." James, now in Elijah's arms, yawned and settled against his shoulder, completely at peace. Richard watched them, his son and this remarkable boy who'd entered their lives just hours ago, and felt something he hadn't experienced since Jamie died. Hope. "Ready to go home?" he asked Elijah. "Well, to my home. Your temporary home. You know what I mean." Elijah nodded, kissing his mother's forehead. "I'll be back tomorrow morning, Mama. They're going to take good care of you here." As they walked toward the elevator, the billionaire, the baby, and the boy from the projects, none of them knew that Harper was already on the phone with a gossip blogger, that the influencer Madison had posted a tell-all video that was going viral, or that by morning, their story would be national news. But in that moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was that a baby had found peace, a father had found his way, and a boy had found an opportunity to change not just his life, but the lives of everyone around him. The next morning arrived with chaos. Richard woke to his phone buzzing incessantly at 5 a.m. Elijah was already up, sitting in the mansion's enormous kitchen with James, feeding him a bottle with practiced ease. "Morning," Elijah said calmly, though Richard could see the boy had seen the news on the kitchen tablet. The headlines were everywhere. Billionaire hires 12-year-old nanny, project kid or PR stunt. Richard Holloway's desperate dad move. Harper had been thorough. She'd leaked everything to multiple outlets, spinning the story as either reckless endangerment or a calculated publicity grab. Madison's video had been edited and re-edited, each version more sensational than the last. "I'm sorry," Richard said, slumping into a chair. "I didn't want this for you." "It's not your fault," Elijah replied, burping James gently. "People see what they want to see. My grandmama used to say, truth is like the sun. Clouds can cover it for a while, but it always shines through." Richard's phone rang. It was his board chairman, Walter Morrison, Eleanor Morrison's husband, though she hadn't mentioned that connection on the plane. "Richard, emergency board meeting in 2 hours. The investors are panicking. Stock dropped 3% in pre-market trading. Because I hired a childcare consultant? Because it looks like you've lost your mind. Bring the boy." "Walter, that's not a request. Eleanor told me everything. I want to meet this young man myself." 2 hours. Richard looked at Elijah, who was now walking James around the kitchen, humming that same soothing tune from the plane. "Elijah, I need to ask you something difficult. Would you come to my office? The board wants to meet you." Elijah paused his walking. "They want to judge me, you mean?" "Yes," Richard admitted, "but also, maybe, to learn from you." Elijah considered this. "Will James be there?" "Of course. Then I'll come. But I'm wearing my own clothes." 2 hours later, they walked into the Holloway Industries building downtown. The lobby was marble and glass, soaring 40 feet high. Employees stared as Richard entered with a baby in a carrier and a boy in worn jeans and a faded Bulls t-shirt. The boardroom was on the 50th floor with views of the entire city. 12 board members sat around a massive table, their faces ranging from curious to hostile. Harper was there too, somehow having talked her way in, sitting with a smug expression. "Gentlemen, ladies," Richard began, but Walter Morrison held up his hand. "We'll hear from the boy first." Elijah stood at the end of the table, looking impossibly small, but completely unintimidated. James started a fuss in his carrier, and without hesitation, Elijah picked him up. "My name is Elijah Washington," he began, swaying gently with James. "I'm 12 years old. I live in Heritage Gardens housing project. And yesterday, I helped Mr. Holloway's baby on a plane because that's what needed doing." "Young man," a severe-looking woman named Patricia Blackstone interrupted. "Are you aware that your presence here has cost our shareholders millions?" "Are you aware," Elijah responded calmly, "that there are babies in my building who cry all night because their mamas can't afford formula? That seems like a bigger problem than stock prices." Several board members shifted uncomfortably. "That's not the point," Patricia began. "Then what is the point?" Elijah asked. "Mr. Holloway needed help with his son. I knew how to help. He offered me a job. I took it. Where's the scandal in that?" Walter leaned forward. "The scandal, young man, is that it appears Richard is exploiting you for publicity." "Do I look exploited?" Elijah asked. He pulled out his phone, an old model with a cracked screen. "This morning, my mama woke up in a real hospital bed for the first time in 3 years. She ate breakfast that wasn't gray and cold. A doctor, a real specialist, spent an hour with her, not 5 minutes. If that's exploitation, then I'll take it." Eleanor Morrison, who had somehow appeared in the room without anyone noticing, spoke from the doorway. "For heaven's sake, you're all missing the point." Everyone turned to stare at her. "Walter, dear, did you tell her what happened on the plane?" Walter looked sheepish. "Eleanor, this boy," Eleanor continued, entering the room, "taught an entire plane full of adults about compassion, patience, and the value of experiential knowledge. He turned a cabin full of angry strangers into a supportive community. In 3 hours, Bradley Cooper entered behind her, followed by the Whitmans and, surprisingly, Anna the flight attendant. "What is this?" Patricia demanded. "We call ourselves the Flight 447 family," Bradley said with a grin. "We've been talking since yesterday. We're here to support Elijah." Anna stepped forward. "I brought something you all should see." She pulled out a tablet and connected it to the room screen. "This is the unedited footage from the plane's security cameras. I got permission to share it for this meeting." The video played, showing everything. Richard's initial struggle, Elijah's respectful approach, the gradual calming of James, the turbulence incident, Richard's breakdown and breakthrough. The room was silent when it finished. Additionally, Anna continued, I want to share this. She pulled up her email. Since yesterday, I've received over 300 messages from flight attendants around the world asking for Elijah's techniques. One attendant from Japan said she used the ear pressure method on a flight this morning. It worked perfectly. Elijah looked surprised. Really? Really? You've already helped babies you'll never meet on flights you'll never take. Harper stood up. This is all very touching, but it doesn't address the liability. Actually, it does, said a new voice. Marcus, Anna's lawyer brother, entered with a briefcase. I've been researching all night. There's significant precedent for youth consultants in specialized fields. Elijah's arrangement is completely legal and, more importantly, ethical. But the optics, Harper tried again. The optics, Walter said slowly, are that Richard Halloway is finally acting like a father instead of a CEO. Eleanor's been telling me for months that Richard needed help with James. This boy provided it. Patricia Blackstone wasn't convinced. What about the foundation? Our charitable giving has protocols. Actually, Elijah interrupted, I have an idea about that. Everyone looked at him. James was now sleeping peacefully in his arms. Yesterday on a plane, I taught maybe 20 people how to calm babies. What if we could teach 20,000? Or 200,000? Go on, Walter said, intrigued. Elijah carefully laid out his idea. Harmony corners, community spaces near hospitals, clinics, and bus stations where experienced caregivers could teach new parents, tired parents, struggling parents. Not with expensive equipment or complicated theories, but with simple, practical knowledge. My grandmama knew 100 ways to soothe a crying baby, Elijah explained. So does Mrs. Johnson, Mrs. Patterson, Mrs. Williams. Women who raised 6, 7, 8 children on nothing but love and wisdom. What if we gave them a place to share what they know? Richard stood up. It would cost very little to set up. Rent, basic supplies, small stipends for the teachers. Maybe $1 million could fund 20 locations for a year. $1 million is very little, Elijah asked, incredulous. For the potential impact, yes, Richard said. Board, I'm proposing we pivot our foundation's early childhood initiative to support this. Real knowledge from real people. This is insane, Harper said. You want to base a multi-million-dollar initiative on the ideas of a 12-year-old? Yes, said Bradley Cooper from the back. And I'll personally fund the first 5 locations. Jennifer Whitman raised her hand. Thomas and I will fund 2 more. I'll handle the Chicago locations, Eleanor said, looking at her husband. Won't we, dear? Walter sighed, but he was smiling. It seems the Flight 447 family has spoken. The board began discussing logistics, but James woke and started crying, the sharp, painful cry that meant he was hungry. Without thinking, Richard stood and took his son from Elijah. Excuse me, he said to the board. My son needs to eat. He prepared the bottle himself, testing the temperature, positioning James correctly, all while continuing to participate in the discussion. The board members watched in amazement as Richard Halloway, the man who once conducted meetings while his assistant handled any personal calls, now naturally integrated fatherhood into his leadership. The PR impact alone, one member mused, seeing Richard as an involved father. That's not why we're doing it, Richard said firmly, burping James. We're doing it because it's right. Because knowledge that helps babies should be freely shared. Because Elijah's right, there are bigger problems than stock prices. Patricia Blackstone studied Elijah for a long moment. Young man, what do you want from all this? Really? Elijah met her gaze steadily. I want my mama to get better. I want to finish school and become a doctor. I want babies in my neighborhood to stop crying from hunger. And I want James here to grow up knowing his daddy loves him enough to learn. And for yourself? Elijah thought about it. A chance to prove that where you come from doesn't determine where you're going. The vote was called. One by one, the board members voted to approve the Harmony Corners initiative with Elijah as youth advisor. Even Patricia Blackstone voted yes, though she added, This better work. Harper stood to leave. This is a mistake. I'll make sure everyone knows. Knows what? Eleanor asked sharply. That a 12-year-old boy had a better idea than all of us? That Richard finally learned to be a father? That sometimes wisdom comes from unexpected places? Please, do tell everyone that. 6 months later, the first Harmony Corner opened in a converted storefront near County General Hospital. The walls were painted in soft, warm colors, yellows and greens that Elijah had chosen because they remind people of spring, of new things growing. The grand opening was deliberately low-key. No press releases from Richard's company, no social media blitz. Just handmade flyers in the neighborhood and word of mouth from the nurses at County General. But people came. They came with crying babies and tired eyes. They came with questions they were embarrassed to ask doctors. They came carrying the weight of not knowing what to do when their child wouldn't stop screaming. And they found Mrs. Johnson from Heritage Gardens, wearing a new Harmony Corner apron, ready with a warm smile and 70 years of wisdom. They found Mrs. Patterson, demonstrating the airplane hold for colicky babies to a young father whose wife was still recovering from delivery. They found Anna, who volunteered on her days off, teaching the ear pressure relief technique to a grandmother flying with her grandchild next week. And they found Elijah, there every day after school, moving between families with quiet confidence, translating Mrs. Johnson's old-fashioned remedies into language young parents could understand. Richard arrived at 4 p.m. with James, as he did every day now. No driver, no assistant, just a father picking up his son from the innovative daycare attached to the corner, where babies were cared for using the techniques being taught just one room over. "Daddy," James called out. At 1 year old, he was walking steadily and had a vocabulary that impressed even his pediatrician. Elijah credited it to all the talking Richard now did with his son. No more silent car rides or meals. "Hey, buddy." Richard scooped James up, then noticed a teenage mother in the corner, crying as her baby screamed. Without hesitation, he walked over. "First baby?" he asked gently. She nodded, tears streaming. "He won't stop. It's been 3 days." Richard set James down. The toddler immediately tottered over to Elijah and held out his arms. "May I?" The girl hesitantly handed over her son. Richard felt the baby's stomach, noted the rigid posture, the way he pulled his legs up. "Gas," he diagnosed. "Here, let me show you something a wise teacher taught me." He demonstrated the bicycle legs motion, then the gentle stomach massage Elijah had shown him months ago. Within minutes, the baby burped, passed gas, and stopped crying. "How did you know?" the girl asked in wonder. "Someone taught me," Richard said simply. "Now I'm teaching you. That's how this works." Across the room, Elijah was with Madison Taylor. Yes, that Madison Taylor. The influencer had shown up a month ago, asking to volunteer as part of what she called her redemption journey. Elijah had agreed, on the condition that she use her platform to share real information, not drama. Her videos from Harmony Corner had a different tone now, respectful, educational, highlighting the grandmother's wisdom. Her follower count had actually grown, with parents appreciating the authentic content. "Elijah," Madison said, filming him with permission this time. "Tell them about the Lullaby Project." Elijah smiled at the camera, but it was genuine, not performed. "We're collecting lullabies from every culture, every family. My grandmama's song, Mrs. Chin's Mandarin song from down the street, Mrs. Rodriguez's Spanish lullabies. Sorry, I mean Mrs. Garcia's." He caught himself, remembering Richard's preferences about names. "We're making a book, but more importantly, we're showing that every culture has wisdom about babies. Every mama and grandmama has something to teach." Harper Voss stood outside, watching through the window. She'd come to write an exposé about the inevitable failure of Harmony Corners for a business blog. Instead, she found herself watching Richard teach a teenager, Elijah comfort a grandmother, James toddling between volunteers with complete trust. She saw Mrs. Johnson teaching a group of young fathers a clapping game that helped babies learn rhythm and timing. She saw the wall of photos, babies who'd been helped, families who'd found support. Her phone rang. It was her editor wanting the hit piece. "There's no story here," she said finally. "Just people helping people." She hung up and walked away, but not before leaving an anonymous donation in the box by the door. Inside, Denise Washington arrived for her volunteer shift. 6 months of proper treatment had transformed her. The cancer was in remission, her energy returning. She worked part-time at the corner now, teaching parents how to manage medications and treatments when babies were sick. Mama. Elijah ran to her, and despite being 12 and a half now, he still hugged her like he was 5. How was school, she asked. Good. Got an A on my biology test. Mr. Richards says if I keep it up, I could get into the accelerated program next year. And Richards' house? They found a balance. Elijah spent weekdays at Richards during school, helping with James in the evenings. Weekends were with his mother in their new apartment. Nothing fancy, but clean and safe, in a building Richard owned and had renovated specifically for families transitioning out of difficult situations. It's good, Mama. James is learning so fast. Yesterday, he said, Eli, help baby. He saw me helping someone here and wanted a copy. Eleanor Morrison arrived with a small film crew. Just for our records, she assured everyone. Walter insists on documentation for the foundation. But as they filmed, what they captured wasn't just a program. It was a community. They caught the moment when a father successfully soothed his baby for the first time, his face lighting up with pride. They recorded Mrs. Patterson teaching 5 young mothers the same song, their voices joining together. They filmed Elijah and Richard working side by side, the billionaire and the boy from the projects now moving in easy synchronization. Bradley Cooper arrived with news. Tokyo wants a harmony corner. So does London. And I just got a call from a hospital in Kenya. They want to adapt the model for their community. Richard looked at Elijah. What do you think? Should we go global? Not we. Elijah corrected. Them. He pointed to Mrs. Johnson, Mrs. Patterson, Denise, and the other community teachers. They're the experts. We just gave them a place to be heard. As the day wound down, Richard and Elijah sat in the corner small office, James playing with blocks at their feet. You know, Richard said, Harper was wrong about the stock price. It's up 15% since we started Harmony Corners. Turns out investors like companies that actually help people. Is that why you did it? Elijah asked. For the stock. You know it's not, Richard said. I did it because you taught me something on that plane. You taught me that love isn't about having all the answers. It's about showing up, learning, and passing on what you know. Elijah pulled out his old notebook, the one with medical terms copied from library computers. But now it also contained James's first words, Richard's attempts at lullabies, notes from board meetings he'd attended. My grandmama used to say that we're all links in a chain, Elijah said. Each person passes something on to the next. Knowledge, love, hope, whatever we got. What did I pass on to you? Richard asked. Elijah thought about it. You gave me a chance to be heard, to show that what we know in the projects, it matters. And you gave me my son, Richard said quietly. Not just physically, but you gave me the ability to be his father. James looked up from his blocks. Dada, Eli, love. Both of them stared at the toddler, who went back to playing as if he hadn't just summed up their entire relationship in 3 words. That evening, as they prepared to close, a young woman walked in carrying a screaming baby. She looked exhausted, desperate, at the end of her rope. Please, she said, I don't know what to do anymore. Mrs. Johnson stepped forward, but so did Richard, Elijah, Denise, Madison, Anna, and 3 other volunteers. You've come to the right place, Elijah said simply. We all know what it's like, and we're here to help. As the woman's baby slowly calmed in Mrs. Johnson's experienced arms, as the mother's tears turned from desperation to relief, as the community wrapped around her with support and wisdom, the truth of what they'd built became clear. It wasn't about a billionaire and a poor boy. It wasn't about stock prices or publicity or social media followers. It was about the simple recognition that everyone has something to teach and everyone has something to learn. The last scene of the day, Richard walking to his car with James on his shoulders, the toddler playing with his father's hair. Elijah walked beside them, heading to meet his mother for dinner. Same time tomorrow? Richard asked. Same time, Elijah confirmed. Then, with a grin, but tomorrow, you're teaching the baby-wearing class. Richard groaned. I'm still terrible at those raps. You'll learn, Elijah said. "You always do." As they parted ways, Richard to his mansion, Elijah to his modest apartment, James waved and called out, "By Eli, see you tomorrow." "See you tomorrow, little man," Elijah called back. And tomorrow would come, bringing new babies to soothe, new parents to teach, new connections to make. The Harmony Corner would continue to grow, spreading from Chicago to cities around the world, carrying the simple message that it started on a plane. When a baby cries, you don't need expertise, you need empathy. You don't need money, you need patience. You don't need perfection, you need presence. And sometimes, just sometimes, a 12-year-old boy from the projects can teach a billionaire the most valuable lesson of all. Love is what teaches you what to do when the crying starts. As Elijah had said 6 months ago, money buys quiet cabins and smooth landings. But love, that's what teaches you what to do when the crying starts. The ripples from that one flight continue to spread. Flight attendants worldwide used Elijah's techniques. Parents found support at Harmony Corners. Richard became known not as a ruthless CEO, but as a devoted father. And Elijah continued his studies, his path to becoming a doctor, now cleared by scholarships from 3 different foundations, including Eleanor's. But most importantly, in a mansion in Lincoln Park, a little boy named James grew up knowing that families come in all forms, that wisdom doesn't always come from books, and that sometimes the most unlikely people can change your life forever. All because one day, on a plane from Atlanta to Chicago, a poor boy did the unthinkable. He offered to help, expecting nothing in return but the quiet satisfaction of a crying baby finally at peace. If a 12-year-old boy could teach a billionaire the meaning of fatherhood, what wisdom are we dismissing simply because it comes from unexpected places? Like and subscribe for more stories that remind us that humanity's greatest teachers rarely wear expensive suits.